All right, I'm going to talk about blockchain. It's a brand new assignment I created, but I will tell you these slides, majority of them were borrowed from John Kelsey at NIST. I do have his link at the very end. But no, I did not create these slides. I did modify them slightly, but yeah, they were not mine. Okay, let's talk about blockchain. It's a single, immutable, serialized source of truth. There is actually a book out there called The Truth Machine, which is amazing. It tells you all the different things we can do for this, so I highly recommend that book. Now, we're going to talk about how to use it. We're going to talk about what does it solve, how chains work, and pretty much everything to do with it. So let's talk about playing chess by mail. So if Alice sends Bob 1 E4, and Bob sends back 1 E5, and so on and so forth, how do we know if, first of all, they're telling the truth and if it will work? It says each of these messages is one move in the game, but what's necessary? So if for Alice to send 1 E4 to Bob and so on and so forth, what do we have to know? Well, we need to know the state of the game. So if we're playing chess, we kind of need to know, we start off initially, okay? Our boards match initially. Then we need to know the sequences so far. For instance, say if I go back here, and instead of starting off with Alice sends Bob 1 E4, what if we just send Alice sends Bob 2 and F3? So, in other words, we have to know every single move, okay? So if you're playing chess and you miss a move, well then obviously your board is not going to match because you are now missing a move. So we need to know the starting position, and we need to know the sequence of moves or messages so far. Kind of like a transcript. So every move that's made, we're going to keep track of that. Then with that, we can reconstruct it. We could literally sit there, take our starting position of our game, move each move in order as it was listed or recorded, and produce the final output of the game. And I says if we agree on history, then we can agree on the present state of the world. Think about it. What do our history books tell us? They tell us exactly how we progress from the first history book until the present time. Hopefully we all agree on that. If that's not true, well then we have issues. But in blockchain, that's kind of what it does. So with blockchain, it says, what do we got to do with blockchain? It says we have some distributed system. We need to come up with a way to share the results, share that transcript, so we know how the chess game was played. We need to know what we started with. We need to know every single board or move on the board so that everybody has the same final result, okay? So we need to all agree on the state of this system, okay? We all need to agree on the initial state. Our blockchain records the moves or records the history of every transaction. Think about it. In the assignment you're going to do, you're going to be giving an initial chain, then 5 hashes. You need to put them in order to come up with a specific final hash. So what we're doing is creating a very small blockchain, and you're going to have to figure that out. So thus we can all agree on the current state of the game. If we know the initial, we know the moves all along. We should all know the current state of the game at any point in time, okay? Why is it important? Bitcoin, okay? Suppose I want to transfer 100 Bitcoins to you, okay? First of all, like it says here, I need to know that you got 100 Bitcoins. If you don't have 100 Bitcoins, then how are you possibly going to, if I'm going to give you 100 Bitcoins, it wouldn't be kind of nice that I had 100 Bitcoins? If you think about our current banking system, I can write you a check. How do we know if that check is any good or not? We don't until the check is presented to our bank. So that's a major flaw in our current system. That's why we have overdraft charges and people go into debt. Imagine a system where I could not pay you until money was verified as being in my account. You can kind of think of that way with a debit card or a credit card, but that still doesn't solve the problem. Credit cards let us go negative. So if a credit card works similar to blockchain, I would have to put money on the card first and then spend until I ran out of money. but still have the same problem. You know, there's a Chinese restaurant here in Del City that I used to go all the time. And I would eat there. We usually ate there once a week, but it never failed. They would process credit card transactions like every 2 or 3 weeks. So I would see no charges coming through. Then all of a sudden I have 3 at the same time. What if I was living paycheck to paycheck? And I kept looking at my account balance every day and said, oh, sweet, the Chinese food never came through, so I can re-spend that money. Then once it finally does come through, now I'm overdrawn. So that's a big issue. BlockChain solves that. Okay. So first thing we need to know, if I want to give you 100 Bitcoins, we need to know, do I have 100 Bitcoins? So we need to know the current state of the system or current state of my bank account. Do I have the Bitcoins to give you? It says we need to know the current state. If you're looking at an old state of the system, I might be playing with money I've already spent. In other words, I might be writing a bad check. Okay. All right, how does this solve it? What problem? It says the blockchain lets us agree on the state of the system, even if we don't trust each other. Okay. You might be a bad guy, a thief, or whatever, but using blockchain, you can't pay me unless you have money. I can't pay you unless I have money. The ultimate goal, we need to all agree on the state of some system. How much money do I have? Who owns it? Is it my blockchain? Is it my Bitcoins? Okay. What is the current state of the program? We can all agree if we agree on history. In other words, what did we start with? What do we currently have? We should be able to look at this blockchain ledger and track it all the way from the beginning of time. I mean, think about it. I own a house. I have a mortgage on that house. And I pay title insurance. Title insurance is to guarantee that they can track my house all the way to the day it was built. That way, if I'm selling my house, to Bob over here, then wouldn't it be nice if Bob knows that I actually own the house and then I got the house from this guy and that guy got it from this guy all the way back to the day it was built. That way, we could prove the correct transfer of title. We have title insurance to solve the problems where that's not done correctly. Becomes very important for things like aircrafts. Those aircrafts are sold all the time. So are cruise ships. So are a lot of very expensive items. So you need to be able to prove who owned them. Okay. So we need to agree on everything. We need to agree on how much Bitcoin in there, who owns the property, what is the current state of the program. So if we can all agree on this, then we should not have a problem. Then we also, like in the red font here, we don't want a single trusted arbitrator of the state of the world. We do not want one single person to be in charge. What do we see on the news all the time now? Fake news, all this stuff. Well, what if this one arbitrator got bought off? Okay, wouldn't be good. So we need some level of decentralization, not a single point of failure. Okay. I use the First National Bank over here. I love them. My favorite bank in the world. But what if First National Bank kept this blockchain? They were the only person in the world who kept the current state of the blockchain. Well, can you imagine we're living here in Oklahoma and First National Bank gets wiped out by a tornado? Last week, one of my neighbors in my neighborhood, we had a big storm, and they got hit by lightning twice within 1 minute. And 2 other lightning strikes in their yard within the additional minute. So what are the odds that this specific house would get hit twice in 1 minute and 2 more times within 2 minutes? I mean, that's unheard of. But what if that one house stored the entire state of the blockchain? Obviously, it's gone because, the house got destroyed. So if my bank was storing the financial ledgers of the entire world, that wouldn't be a good thing. So what we need is a decentralized system to get rid of this entire central point of failure. All right. Let's talk about trusted arbitrator. If we want a completely trusted arbitrator, we won't need a blockchain. But can we trust our arbitrator? We never can. Okay. It says we could just define reality as whatever they say. And who are you going to find that you can totally trust? For a payment system, imagine trusted arbitrator as a bank. Bank provides the official sequence of transactions and account balances. When you want to spend money, you send a message to the bank permits it or denies it, then updates the account balances. But again, we still have the single point of failure in my bank. Okay, so why isn't that a good idea? Like, is there a single point of failure? If my bank or my trusted arbitrator goes down for a week, the system stops working. What if there was a power failure or something happened and I went to spend money and all of a sudden they couldn't tell if I had any money? Well, if the people didn't verify the transaction, they'd still give me my purchase, but that might be overspending. Okay? Concentration power. He who controls the past controls the future is also kind of a bad thing. Okay? Trusted arbitrators consent to transactions, impose new conditions to get transactions included in history. What if I had my bank and someone reported to them, hey, this guy bought this stuff 8 years ago and I never recorded it, and they added it? That wouldn't be a good thing. Can you imagine someone in my bank presenting something to my bank with good evidence that Ken Dewey bought something 8 years ago, and the bank says, oh, fine, they added it, now I'm whatever dollar short? That sucked. Says, then there's nobody we will trust. Can you think of a single person other than yourself that you could trust with all of your information? I mean, would you even trust yourself? I don't know. Kind of hard something to think about. So what does blockchain buy us again? It says a distributed system. We have a system that is no longer giving us a single point of failure, a single trusted arbitrator. Okay. We don't all trust each other or any single entry. This distributed system is not reliant upon one person. Everybody has to agree, and we're going to see how that works. We want to agree on history, so we need to be able to agree on where we started so that we can agree on the current state of the system so we could do something. Says we get the functionality of a trusted arbitrator without needing a trusted arbitrator. So we need a group of a system, a distributed system that does all this. Okay. So how do they work? One party requests a transaction. The requested transactions are funded or funneled into our P2P network and broadcast to each one of the individual computers or nodes. They all receive the request and validate it. Okay? Then it says the approved transactions are then represented in blocks of code and added to a public ledger. Then once it's approved and added to the ledger, they now come back and tell me that it's completed and it's in there for life. Okay. Kind of like the assignment you're going to do. You're going to have to take the initial chain, add the 5 hashes in a specific order to come up with the final chain. In other words, the current state of the system. Okay. There's only one way those can be put in correctly to come up with the result. Same with blockchain. People cannot edit the register or edit the transaction log to produce a different result. Okay, how does it work? Because the blockchain is a sequence of hash-chained records. Once you've seen record N, in other words, a random number, you can't change anything in the past. So say we're at record 5,000. Record 5,000 actually was created by combining the prior 4,999 records. So we cannot go back and edit any of those prior 499,000 records, because if we do, they'll no longer match record 5,000. Okay? So some procedure for adding blocks onto the blockchain. How do we add blocks? How is this done? So we need to figure out how this is done. Then we need to also check validity. Are the transactions valid? Are the digital signatures correct? So there's a lot of stuff we got to do there. Then we need to have some sort of consensus. Okay, what if something's presented to the blockchain that's invalid? So we need to figure out a way to check that. We're going to talk about all of these. We need some sort of procedure for deciding between alternative candidate blocks. Okay? So what happens if a block is received and it's not correct? Are we going to take a different block in its place? It says when Alice and Bob have different pictures of history, there's some way for them to eventually come to agreement on who is right. Okay? Think of voting. If I want to make a decision, it's not a problem. I can make the decision. But can you imagine if I made every decision for everyone in the world? Probably wouldn't be a good idea. So there has to be some way of coming up to a consensus on that. They work with what's called a cryptographic hash function. You take some sort of bit string as input, could be a file. In your assignment, you're just going to be using a small string of text. So you can take whatever this is, create a hash value out of it. Okay? It produces a fixed length output, typically between 256 and 512 bytes. And nobody can find collisions. We're going to talk more about collisions, but a collision is when two different strings produce the same result. That should never happen. You should never have two different files, for instance, that produce the same result. That's why MD5 became an issue. In your assignment, you're going to be using SHA-256. Okay, so here's some examples: 256, 512, so on and so forth. So sometimes there's a really huge maximum input length. We want to limit the size of the file that can be taken in, because this system actually has to do the calculations to come up with the hash. And if it's too big, how long would it take? Okay. So here's what a collision is. Suppose I can find two different inputs, X and Y. So two different files or two different strings, we'll label one X and one Y. So we have two different inputs. And if the hash, if I take a hash of those two strings, and if the hashes match, that's called a collision. We should never, ever, 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 ever have a collision. Okay? So for a cryptographic hash function to be any good, it needs to be collision resistant. If I change any value whatsoever, you see this in other classes, but if I change anything in that string, the hash would have to be totally different. Okay? All right, it means it's just impossible to practice, or impossible in practice to find colliding inputs. Now I'm going to show you something here real quick if I can find it. Let's see, I need this demo program. Let's see if I can run this real quick. Can I put this on top? Okay. Here's the actual demo program I give you guys. Now, I want you to look at this first line, okay? I'm going to run this, and you'll see when I ran it, the first hash that came up with started with F700. You see that? So this string, this is my first hash, produced, see on this down line right here, I actually output that hash to the string. So that string, this is my first hash, produced F700, 285, 259, so on and so forth. I'm going to take this hash and put a period in it. Okay? Remember, it started with F700. So all I did was I added that little teeny tiny period. Now I'm going to run this again. Now look at it. So remember, I first ran it, we had F700 right there, F700. Now we have 90B80. Let's take off the period. Let's actually put the period right here. So again, it's the same string, I just moved the place of the period. Let's run this again. And now we get D499. So just by changing that period, you'll see the hash is changing. Now what if I get rid of that hash? Now it's to go back to the original F700. Let's run it again, and sure enough, now we get the original. So this specific string is the only string in the world that can produce this F700. Okay, makes sense? No, maybe that way. Okay. So if they did produce the same, that would be considered a collision. So for cryptographic hash functions, they need to be collision resistant. Just means it's impossible in practice to find colliding inputs. And you'll notice again on here, I'm actually using, I import hashlib in Python, and I'm using hashlib.SHA-256. So this ran through SHA-256 to produce that F700. Okay. All right. Why is it useful? If no one can find something where X is not equal to Y, so if we cannot find a single string where we have different strings where X is not equal to Y, in other words, two different strings, such that the hashes match. So over here, so remember when I added that period to move the period, that was 2 different strings. So if no one can find 2 different strings that produce the same hash, then we can use the hash as what's called the message digest. Okay? We no longer have to include the entire string. We just have to include the hash, because we know that one specific message or string produced that hash, so we can use that message digest. Hence, if you'll notice right here, when I was outputting that value, I was actually outputting the hash hex digest, or the message digest of it. You see down here, I actually use the digest of it. So we're using the digest of the message. It says digital signatures are actually string hash messages instead of messages. In yours, we create the hash initially, but then we only work with hashes after that point. If they could do that, then we find, so no, we do not want collisions. Then hash X also commits to X. We know that hash X, right here, this hash X, get my little marker out. Let's draw with a highlighter. This hash X right here is linked specifically to this X. Okay. So there's no other X that would produce that particular hash. Okay. So once I've seen hash X later, you can show me X and I know that it's the same. So if I show you the hash later on, I should be able to take X all over again, produce the same hash, and they should match. Okay. And go away. All right. So you can't show me some other X, because I won't have. If you did show me a different X or a string that was modified slightly, we know they would not produce the same hash. Okay. All right. Now, this is not exactly how yours works, but in blockchain we have an index. Think like an index: 0, 1, 2, 3. Then we have a previous hash. In other words, the hash of the previous block, or the initial one, our payload, and then the hash of all of this. So think of this as block 0. This is our very first block out there. The index would be 0. The previous hash would be nothing. There is none. So think of the hash of a blank one. And then we're going to add our payload, combine all this together, create a hash of all of this. Then that new hash value becomes the hash, or the previous value, in the next block. I was going to have you do all this in your assignment, but I figured it'd be easier just working with individual hashes. That way the data structure would be a little bit smaller. If you want to do this, that would be amazing. I just was trying to make a data structure that was a little bit easier to manage for you all. So the second one, we take all, in other words, you take the index number, the previous hash, the payload, and calculate all of that into a new hash. Then that new hash becomes the previous of the next one, and so on and so forth. So a sequence of records linked together. Each record contains the hash of the previous record. All right, a hash chain is a sequence of records in which each record contains a hash of the previous record in the chain, and the hash of all current records' contents. Again, your assignment, you're not working with such a large data structure. You're just working with hashes. But again, the initial hash combined with hash 1 produces the result. Then combine that with hash 2, that produces a different result. So they are all included in there as well. Okay, what is all this give us? Why do we do all this? This is when using a cryptographic hash function like SHA-256, it means that nobody can find 2 inputs that produce the same result. Okay, it means that record N contains a commitment to the record before it. So if we're looking at this third record here, that third record contains the results of the second record, which contains results of the first record, and so on and so forth. In other words, we can go back in history and find all the way back to the very beginning when we first started. So record N1 contains records N-2, then N-2 contains record N-3, so on and so forth. So we're literally linking them or chaining them together so we know specifically how they work. I might change the assignment at one point or another to include this larger data structure. I was just trying to be nice and make it easier to work with. So what happens? So attacker changes this little payload up here on the top one, number 2. They change that payload. What happens? Well, since that payload was changed, obviously the hash of this entire block was changed, which means this previous one would be changed, which means this hash would be different. So changing something in the past would propagate forward so that, I mean, you could not change this payload without affecting this hash. And since this previous hash here, get my marker up here again, since this hash right here, this previous hash right here matches this hash, and since we changed this payload right here, this payload would adjust this hash. If this hash didn't match this hash, then we got a problem. So it's very easy to work back through history and find out where it was messed up. Okay. It says hash chains and blockchains. Hash chains are the property of every record that contains a commitment to all prior records. We just talked about it 5 times. You change record end, then a change in record n, think of n like a variable. A change in record 5 means that it changes the final hash of record 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. So any record changes the next records. Once we accept record n, then we're locked into all the records prior to n. So say n is 500. And if we are totally happy with record 500, then that means we are happy with 499, 498, 497, all the way back to the beginning of time. We can't accept 500 and not accept the ones prior to it. Okay? So blockchains use hash chains as a component. Again, you are working on with just a hash chain in your assignment. Okay? They're also good in a lot of other contexts. For example, a system with a trusted arbitrator can use a hash chain to limit the arbitrator's power. Even the arbitrator can't change it. In one of the books I was listening to, the Truth book, they were talking about the E. coli outbreak of a popular, I guess, Mexican restaurant. Well, what if anytime we purchase something, we actually could track it back into the day it was made? Imagine, kind of like we have RFID, imagine every component of that burrito you bought, that specific lettuce that was being used today. What if we could track that lettuce back to the truck, to the box it came out of, to the crate that came out of, to the shipper that shipped it to us, to the manufacturer that, you know, did something to it, to the grower that actually grew it, to the field he grew it in. You know, can you imagine that? If we could actually track it down to the individual item, then rather than, you know, recalling 5,000 whatevers, we could only recall a very few. This chain that had their issue, the Mexican restaurant, the closest they get it down to is the product in question was produced somewhere in Australia. So there was no way to track it back farther than Australia. That's a very big place. We get a lot of stuff from Australia. Okay. All right. So the blockchains, these blockchain commits to all previous blocks. We talked about that. If you're happy with a block 500, you also need to be happy with 499 and so on and so forth. Now, in cryptography, a nonce is an arbitrary number that can be used just once, similar to an index, not necessarily an index, but think of it like an index. So the blockchain contains 3 blocks. Each chain contains the hash of the prior block, a sequence of transactions, and a nonce. So we have the new data. We have this kind of like index number, this nonce, then the hash of the prior block. All of that is hashed together and becomes the hash of the next block. Okay. Validity says, what will the world accept as the new block? Well, we just don't have many trusted entities to decide what may be added to a blockchain. So we need to figure out how to add a block. If you're presenting a new block to the blockchain, will they accept it? is a good block? Okay, so here with Bitcoin, it says signatures needed for moving blockchains from an account. So where did it come from? Where is it going to? The account it came from, did it have a negative balance or not? And here's a new concept. Blocks must contain correct proof of work. We're going to talk a whole bunch more about that in a second. So a proposed additional block that doesn't meet these conditions won't be accepted. In other words, it doesn't have the proper signatures. It doesn't have, it will not leave the account in negative balance, and there's proof of work. The funny thing, look at this last line, not really funny, but the enforced by a consensus. Everybody, or the majority, must agree. Now let's talk about fork chains for a second. Blockchains are used in distributed systems. But what if there is a disagreement? Okay. So it's possible for different parties to disagree. If there's no trusted arbitrator, what do we do? Okay. So what if, an example here, Ethereum. Ethereum is similar to Bitcoin. Ethereum decided to change the Ethereum token. They wanted to modify it in some way. Not everybody wanted to do it. Some of the people said, actually they did it with Bitcoin as well, but some of the holders of Bitcoin said, no, I like the current state of Bitcoin. But the problem was the transaction speed of Bitcoin is too slow. For it to become a currency used everywhere, it needs to be able to handle more transactions. Can you imagine if you can only handle, say, 10 transactions a minute? That would never work. So would a million transactions be acceptable? But if it starts being used, can you imagine how many credit cards are used right now? Can you imagine Visa only accepting 100 credit cards a minute, or even 100 credit cards a second? I mean, I can imagine Walmart by itself accepts more than 100 credit cards a second. Okay. So what they do is when Bitcoin decided to, actually both, and Bitcoin and Ethereum both decided to modify their systems to support, different criteria, make them process faster and such, what they did is they forked it. We had the initial Ethereum and then the one after the fork. So we could prove the money was there from the original one, and you could stay with the original one. But now we have additional one, a new version of Ethereum after the fork. Think of it like Europe. When I was in Europe, we had German marks, we had British pounds, we had Italian lira. And I tell you, man, we went on a trip driving all over Europe. We had all these kinds of different money. Well, now we have the euro, which is used everywhere. So what do you think they did with all that old money? Did they throw it away? No. They come up with a way of determining the value. So what Bitcoin and Ethereum did was you could keep your original Bitcoin and Ethereum and continue to function as such. Or you could trade it in for the new version and get the equivalent money. So you could keep your German marks or trade it in for euros. Okay, that's pretty much what they did. You must just figure out how to work on it. So suppose Alice and Bob no longer agree on the state of the world. So we got this blockchain where something changed and we no longer can agree on it. All this time, we got this history textbook that everybody agrees on, but all of a sudden we no longer can agree because of something we found in history. Well, what do you do about that? So how do we come to an agreement on who's right? Several different techniques. Let's talk about them. Okay, so as adding new blocks to chains, any blockchain system has to determine how to add new blocks and how it's done. Okay, two different ways are proof of work and permissions blockchain. Okay, there's also proof of stake, proof of storage, and other stuff we're not going to talk about. But let's talk about these other two first. Okay, proof of work. I want you to do a big computation and prove to me that you did it, and I don't want to make it hard for me to check it. Okay? So in other words, you wonder, so it's called mining. You could mine Bitcoin, which is pretty much done now, but you can still mine Ethereum. So you could literally install the software and mine Ethereum. then what happens is when you produce the work required to solve the calculation and prove that your calculation is correct, you get awarded with an Ethereum token. So you think, how can we possibly just do that? How can we just give out Ethereum for someone just doing work? Well, guess what? They're giving me dollars now for teaching at my school. So am I not doing work for a paycheck at the end of the month? What is any difference in me doing the work at Rose State and receiving a paycheck to someone mining Ethereum and receiving the Ethereum token? There's no difference. It's the exact same thing. Okay? So why is this useful? Well, it limits the rate of new blocks. First of all, it's tough. So imagine Rose State just giving out free money. It would really have no value. So I have to work for my money. The same with, this here with blockchain. People have to produce the work, in other words, proof of work, to show that they did the work and produce a valid hash before it can be accepted. This is make attempts to add invalid blocks very expensive, because it would be very hard, first of all, to work with our distributed system to get a whole bunch of people to accept it. Okay. Provides a clear way to decide between competing chains when there is a disagreement which one works better than the other. Okay, almost done here. Hold on, I got someone in my door. Let me pause for just a second. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so let me see where I left off. Sorry. See, I left off with that one. We were talking about proof of work. Okay, so what if I give you a challenge? We'll call this challenge C, and a limit, say 2 to the 220, which is very huge. I want you to produce a number so that when that number or the challenge is less than out. In other words, I want to make sure the amount of work needed is less than a very large number, which is that 2 to the 220. Okay, so the average time it would take is about 236. What they're basically saying here is, how hard would it be to come up with a valid hash? Okay. Now, on your assignment, you're going to have to just take 5 hashes I give you and put them in order. Pretty simple to do in comparison. But what if I didn't give you those 5 hashes and you had to come up with a valid hash? So if I did not give you a string, let me bring my program back over here again. Actually, I ran it right here. So I ran my demo program and produced this hash right here. So I know which string creates that hash. But what if you didn't have that string? Okay? You would have to try every combination of everything to come up with this hash. Okay? And there's only going to be one thing in the world that's to produce this specific hash. So proof of work is basically, that's going to take you a darn long time. Okay? Even if you're just trying to put a combination of letters together. And we're talking hex, 0 through F. What is the combination? I mean, way more than I can think of. So proof of work is basically saying, you're going to do something. It can take you a long darn time. And since you're putting in that much effort, you get something for it. And when you do succeed, I have to just check. Since I have the initial string, I can very easily check and see what you produce to see if they match. Right? That's what we're talking about. Okay. All right. Now, it says proof of work in every block. It says with 3 blocks in the chain, the nonce is the first is chosen to force its hash value, which is in the second block, and so on and so forth. So there is a limit on this. Again, we wouldn't want to, hashes like the one I have here, this hash is specifically produced with SHA-256. SHA-512 produces something more. Okay, and there's ones you can produce different links. Okay. All right, it says we can resolve disagreements. When chains fork, it says take fork with most work. So what if we have two different results? Okay. We can look at the one that took the longest to do. Okay. So say, so when there's a tie, keep working until the chains have one has the most work. So if we're having two people work on something and two different people produce the same result, we can't give it to two people. Think of it like a spelling bee. I was actually saw on the news this morning, the spelling bee. It's like 14 students are in the final round. All 14 of those students have produced the same amount of work at this point. In other words, they have solved the same number of words in the spelling bee. Do we stop there? No. We go into the finals where those 14 battle it out. And then they might battle out again. They might go into, again and have to do additional rounds. So do we quit when there's two winners? No, we keep going until there's one winner. Can you imagine a football game where there's a tie? Then in overtime, there's a tie again. Up, we're done. I guess they both won the trophy. No, we keep going. We keep adding more overtime until there's an actual winner. That's what they're talking about here. When there's a tie, keep working until one of the chains has the most work. In other words, did the most. Okay. It says this discourages people from trying to add invalid blocks. You spend a lot of time and effort calculating that value. Okay. If it's not valid, no one accepts it. So you come up and you produce this string, this hash value, and you try to present it to the blockchain. If it wasn't produced correctly, it's not going to work. Because remember, in the blockchain, the prior block is also included in it. So it's a lot more involved. Okay. So that's part of how Bitcoin is very clever designed to incentive works. So it's pretty hard to manage. Okay. But it also brings in others. There's lots of energy used to generate proofs. You can actually go online and you can find cloud-based Ethereum miners. You can pay them. You can pay them X number of dollars a year, and they will literally mine Ethereum for you. And you will get guaranteed results. But the question is, again, I don't know what it costs, but imagine you're spending $80 a year. Again, I don't know what it costs. I'm just speculating here. So if I hire an Ethereum miner, cloud-based Ethereum miner, he has all the equipment and everything needed because you need high-powered machines with a lot of GPUs. So he is charging me $80 a year. Now, as long as he produces $80 or more in Ethereum, awesome. I'm making a profit. What if he produces less? Okay. What if the cost of Ethereum changes? When Bitcoin was initially made, it sold for 7 cents, 0.07 per Bitcoin. Now it's up, I think, $9,000 per Bitcoin. They're saying when it first came out, a pizza company, I forget the name, a pizza company actually decided to accept Bitcoin. You don't accept it as money, you accept it as barter. You're trading a Bitcoin for a pizza. So this first pizza that was ever bought with Bitcoin, that same amount of Bitcoin that was used way back when is worth $10 million right now. Can you imagine being that pizza company that accepted that Bitcoin way back when and just held it in your pocket or held it in your Bitcoin wallet, cast it in today? That one pizza earned you $10 million. Isn't that amazing? It's just crazy. Okay. So this whole proof of work is done by miners of Bitcoin and Ethereum and the other stuff as well. The special purpose mining rigs optimized to do this. Environmental impact uses a lot of power. Okay. Accomplishing no useful goal except keeping blockchains working. So it could take a long time. But again, as long as people are accepting Bitcoin, I bought Bitcoin the other day, and let me see what it's worth today. I bought it, and let's see, where are we at? I'm going to find my app here. I bought $1 worth of Bitcoin like a month ago, or 2 months ago. I don't remember exactly when I bought it. And looking today, I can't show it to you on the recording, my Bitcoin today, remember I bought $1 worth. my current amount of Bitcoin today, first of all, I own, here's how much I own. I own 0.000100172 Bitcoins. So however many digits that is. That's what $1 bought me. 0.000100172 Bitcoins. So when did I buy this Bitcoin? I bought this Bitcoin about 2 months ago. Yep, right at 2 months ago. So that Bitcoin today, can you guess what it's worth? In $1 of Bitcoin 2 months ago is worth 77 cents today. So what that's telling me is Bitcoin in the last 2 months has lost value. Does that mean I throw it away? No. First of all, I did it just to do it. But now if I spent $10 million, obviously I would have lost a lot of money. But there's a chance it goes up. And if it goes up, that $1 might be worth $2 or $3 soon. You never know. Just imagine if I spent $1 when it cost 7 cents. Wow, wouldn't it have been amazing if I bought $1 worth of Bitcoin when it cost 7 cents? I'd be rolling in it right now. Okay, in comparison. Okay, so this whole proof of work, it says slow. Proof of work seems to put a limit on transaction speed, even more than you consider needed to resolve potential disagreements. So anytime a transaction is presented to the blockchain, we need to prove that it's correct. In other words, we need to look at the previous hash. We need to, calculate the current hash, make sure it's all correct. It says the Bitcoin rule of thumb is to wait 6 blocks or about an hour to be sure that the transaction went through. That's an issue with Bitcoin. They're too slow. That's why Ethereum is much better currently. Now let's talk about permissions. It says an alternative to proof of work. So we have said as somewhat trusted entities who can work together to add records to it. For example, it says you can have 5 trustees, and if 3 of them vote in favor of adding it, the block's added. So the validity condition is that a majority must accept it. Okay? So 3/5 of the vote. It says resolution of conflicting chains, look for, again, the longest or the most votes. With 3/5 vote, there should never be any forks because there's no way it can be a tie. There will never, ever be a tie. Okay, incentive. It says the real genius in blockchain design is the way incentives are aligned. Untrusted, self-interested miners keep the system working. So people are producing these hashes and getting paid for it. Okay? There's a big incentive to follow the protocol. There's successful capital invested in Bitcoin. So avoid attacks, blah, blah, blah. This also works because Bitcoin is all about moving money around. It's about easy to build payoffs into the protocol. So you can store it, you can pay stuff with it, you can collect it, you can save it, you can do it. But again, it's not taxed right now. So you can say, how is the federal government not taxing Bitcoin? Well, they're not, because it's not money, it's bartering. I am trading my Bitcoin for a pizza. Someone actually bought a car with Bitcoin. And if I remember right, it's Lexus. Lexus to this day does accept Bitcoin as proof of payment or type of payment. Someone also bought a helicopter with Bitcoin. But they're not considering buying it, they're trading it, which is kind of funny because if you think about it, I went and bought a water the other day for 89 cents. You can ask the question, did I pay for that water with 89 cents or did I trade 89 cents for that water? If I traded the 89 cents for that water, I do not have to pay taxes on it because I did not do a financial transaction. I just traded it. But if I bought the water with 89 cents, now I need to pay taxes on it. Very fine line there because it's kind of the same thing. Okay. It says once blockchains, especially permission ones, have defined alternatives to incentives, but not obvious from how the payoffs are handled yet, because you can still make a bunch of money on it. Okay. Why do we trust trustees? Is it existing business or legal arrangements? So why do I trust Rose State Regents? Okay. Well, first of all, they're in charge of my school. They have been elected and appointed by the governor to serve in that position. Okay. Well, are there incentives for playing fair or reputation? Again, our regions have a reputation. They're appointed by the governor to serve in our place. But think of a CEO. CEOs get paid millions of dollars. Okay? They're paid to hold that position. They're paid to hopefully play fair. You hire them based on the reputation. Okay? And there's always, can you imagine if you're the CEO of a company and you don't play fair and you have to go to jail? Okay. It says, usually a bad idea to build crypto protocols that rely on outside enforcement mechanisms, sending people to jail, suing people, and stuff like that. Lots of examples of things that just don't work right. It says, there is something that permission blockchains have to solve. Again, those 5 people that are going to vote, who are those 5 people? Okay, that's why proof of work is normally a better option. Okay, we're pretty much done here. Blockchains, we do not have to trust each other. We don't have to trust a third party. It's a distributed system, but we do have to agree on the past. We have to agree on history. We have to agree on the current state of the system. How do we do that? Well, we can always work backwards. Again, if we trust block 500, means we automatically trust 499. If we trust 499, we automatically trust 498, and so on and so forth. Okay. The nth record in a hash chain commits to all previous records. Again, if we trust 500, we must trust 499 because 500 came from 499. 499 means we must trust 498 because 499 came from 498, so on and so forth. We can't change prior records or previous records because it affects future records. Okay. A blockchain is a hash chain with some other stuff added. Validity, in other words, it gives us a way of checking hashes. In your assignment, again, I'm giving you the hashes. Are they valid hashes? Well, they are because I gave them to you. But what if they weren't? Okay. All right. Ways to handle disagreements. And we talked about permission versus proof of work. There's other ways, proof of storage, proof of stake, and again, other stuff we're not going to talk about. But hopefully at this point, we have a general idea of what the heck blockchain is, and maybe a little bit about Bitcoin. Again, there's a book out there called The Truth Machine. The cover looks like some padlocks. Really, really, really interesting books. I recommend you read it. Okay, that is all I got for you. So I'm going to stop this here recording.